We're going to kick off here with our first presentation, looking at the overview of the National Youth Sports Strategy, which is actually one of the impetuses for this entire live stream. They did an event in DC through the President's Council on Sport, Fitness, and Nutrition back in April, and we were able, as the USCCE, to participate. It was an amazing day of listening to people talk about different elements of youth sport, and it was very impactful for those of us who were participated and the folks who got to watch. And it was part of their process in putting together the report. If you haven't read it, it's an amazing report. And Dr. Katrina Piercy is with us on Zoom, and she's going to present and tell us a little bit about an overview of the strategy and the role of the coach within it.
All right, great. Well, I'm sorry I can't be there with you all in person, but really appreciate the invitation to join the conversation today and to share some information with you all. Kristen gave a nice kind of background a little bit about how we developed the National Youth Sports Strategy, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how that piece came together, why we did this, and then really focus on what we have in the strategy in terms of how this relates to the coaching piece. So to get things started, I like to kind of set the stage of where we are with things. So usually when I give this type of presentation in person, I ask how many people in the room have participated in sports themselves. I can't see everybody there, but I'm going to guess if you could put your hand up, most of you probably had the opportunity to play sports at some point during your lifetime. Unfortunately, many kids do not have that same opportunity today. The data, as we look at it now, shows about 55% of youth are playing youth sports, and there are some pretty significant disparities when it comes to who is able to play within that 55%. There's some differences with gender, also with age as kids get older, with race and ethnicity, and really particularly with family income or socioeconomic status. So why does this matter? Well, we know from our work, our office led the development of the physical activity guidelines for Americans, and we spent years looking at the science base on the benefits of physical activity. And so we know that kids that get at least 60 minutes a day of physical activity have improved bone health and muscle strengthening and body weight outcomes and feel better and set them up on a great lifetime trajectory. But we also know that youth sports, in addition to the benefits physical activity, we get even more from playing sports. And these are kind of some of the psychosocial side of things, as you can see on the slide, the mental health, self-esteem, confidence, things like improved physical literacy. So that is the knowledge and skills to be able to do different activities. So one of the things sports can bring of just the basic logistics of how to kick a ball or how to throw. I have a 3.5-year-old, and I had forgotten until working with him that you have to teach these things. And sports is a great way to learn some of these great life skills. So we know that there are all these benefits, and we know that there are big disparities. So that really led us to what do we need to do to level this playing field? And so the vision of the National Youth Sports Strategy is that one day all youth will have the opportunity, motivation, and access to play sports, regardless of their race, ethnicity, sex, ability, or zip code. And that was kind of our overarching vision that we put into the strategy, thinking about this from the federal government perspective, but also wanting all of the groups and organizations that are doing great work in youth sports, how can we combine and work together towards this vision? So to give you a little background on where this came from, the National Youth Sports Strategy was developed from an executive order from the White House that was released in 2018, and there was 4 main pillars that we were asked to address: the increased awareness of the benefits, promote private and public sector strategies to increase participation, thinking about metrics and tracking youth sports participation, and then also thinking about the volunteer efforts. And this is where the coaching piece really comes in, as a lot of coaches are volunteering, are parents that are stepping up and being a part of that. So those were the 4 main pieces. I should note that the executive order did also talk about the importance of healthy eating and regular physical activity. We felt like we had covered those 2 bases with the dietary guidelines for Americans and the physical activity guidelines for Americans. We had federal policy pieces as well as communication campaigns with those. So we really focused the youth sports strategy on the sports piece. Felt like that was really a gap to really highlight. So how did we develop this? Kristen mentioned a little bit. This is kind of our tried and true process for developing federal policy or federal documents. We gathered input from the public as well as the scientific literature, as well as expertise within the federal government. And I just want to thank everybody who has touched this process, whether that's public comments that you provided, whether participating in the listening session, which Kristen was a part of, whether providing peer review or providing input. We went through all of it, and we do appreciate everyone's expertise, thoughts, comments. It really made the strategy a piece that I think was really applicable to a lot of organizations and the work that's already going on. I should highlight as well, the second pillar of the strategy is focused on highlighting private and public sector strategies. And so realizing that a lot of this work is going on kind of at the ground level. We didn't need to come in and kind of reinvent strategies and come up with new tactics, but we relied on these 4 research reports, as you see on the slide here, that being the National Physical Activity Plan, which has 8 different sectors that talk about different strategies. There's a sports sector, there's an education sector, parks and rec, so we could pull pieces from that. The Aspen Institute, Sport for All, Play for Life, has some great strategies of what can be done. The Women's Sports Foundation, which is focusing on females and how to get them more involved. And as I showed, there is some disparities when it comes to gender, so that was important. And finally, the Design to Move, which is a piece by Nike, the American College of Sports Medicine, and other organizations. This is a few years older and a little bit more focused on physical inactivity, but does talk about strategies related to sports. And so these were the key pieces that we really focused in on to develop the strategy. So we took all of those pieces from those 4 reports, and what we did is develop a framework for understanding youth sports participation. We come up with this model, looks very similar to the social ecological model, and realizing that really every layer within society has an opportunity to improve access, participation, awareness, all these different pieces related to youth sports. And so as you see in this model here, it starts at the very center. The core of this is the kids themselves, the individual or intrapersonal. The next level is the interpersonal, which is dealing with adults who interact with youth. So this is on the coaching side of this, as well as coaches are covered in terms of the organizational level and how they're being addressed. The community level, and finally the public policy. Now, if you look at all of these pieces, the main part of the youth sports strategy covers all of the different strategies. There's over 50 in total. So there's many pieces and many layers. And for the purposes of today's conversation, I've really focused on what are the pieces that are related to coaching or kind of overarching, touching coaching from a organizational level. So let me highlight the role of coaches and kind of how they relate in terms of the organization piece and what is the key pieces they can affect here. So thinking about how programs can be accessible and inclusive. Accessibility also means we tend to think first about, can we get to the location? Where are we holding the practice, the camp, where's the facility? But also accessible that kids of all abilities can play and can participate. And so that sometimes is on the coaches of thinking about how can we modify a game, how can we modify an activity so that everybody can be involved. Recruiting and training, I'm sure this piece will get touched on a lot, but thinking about coaching and volunteers, many of them may be former athletes that have that experience as a player, so they may have the sports skills or know the knowledge of the game, but they probably need some training on how to coach. That's another piece. Coaches can help to encourage kids to play a variety of sports throughout the year. So a big piece that a number of organizations are focusing on now is sports sampling. And basically this means the idea that kids younger than age 12 are doing different activities throughout the year and are not focused solely on one sport. A lot of times it can be the coaches or the parents that are kind of pushing kids into that year-round baseball or year-round soccer and things like that. So there's a role where coaches can be encouraging kids to try other activities, try different sports. And then also thinking about sports as really an opportunity to build confidence and kind of lay this foundation. And this goes back to the physical literacy piece. And this comes from how coaches are setting up things in terms of practices and how they're running the team. Also thinking from a step up at the organizational level as it relates to coaches, requiring and providing background checks. So there is a safety piece of this as well that we talk about in this strategy, but this is another piece that we need to be mindful of, thinking about how are we taking care of all of the kids that are a part of the sports programming. Again, this training piece, certification, there's many different ways to do it, and this is a key focus that you all are working on, but I think an important piece to come up with some type of consistency or some way to be able to provide that information and education to the coaches. And then thinking about, what equipment, what training, what resources do the coaches need to do their job well. So shifting gears a little bit here, I want to then highlight a few of what we did within the National Youth Sports Strategy with finding some organizations that are already doing great work in the field. So I said there's over 50 different strategies themselves, and we pulled together a few organizations. These aren't necessarily ones that we're endorsing, but just wanted to highlight some of the great work that's going on, and thinking about ways that they have combined different pieces to remove some of the barriers for youth sports, especially in some of these underserved populations, so things like cost and accessibility. So to highlight a few of them here, the Ohio State Life Sports, and this program is run out of the university, and what they do is use the athletic facilities as well as former college athletes, the students themselves, to help run camps through summer programs. Girls on the Run, which many of you may be familiar with, it's getting some great widespread attention in a number of different states, but this is focused on female-focused leadership and coaching to help girls with youth development, as well as teaching them running and kind of life skills. The YMCA, there are over 800 locations across the United States, and so they provide a lot of free and low-cost programming, and their locations make it a lot easier for more kids to access that. The Special Olympics Unified Sports, which is focused on combining teams which have kids of all abilities. And so this is putting everybody on the same team together and allowing them to work together. This removes some of the stigma side of things and also can help kids help each other out and ensure that all kids of every ability have the opportunity to play sports. The Washington Nationals Youth Baseball Academy, and we had picked out this group before they won the World Series, but that was a nice piece as well. They have free programming in Ward 8 of the DC area, so a very low-income area, and they're providing not only skills and baseball related, but also life skills, homework help, and other pieces. And then finally, Saturday Night Lights, which takes funds that come into the district attorney's office through white-collar crimes, uses those funds to keep open gym facilities on the weekends and the evenings, so times when kids might be doing some less healthy behaviors, they're providing an outlet and a place for kids to go play and have sports and be mentored, and a great opportunity to kind of get them off the streets. So these is just kind of a snapshot. We've provided them in the sports strategy. They're also as takeaways, and so you can just download a PDF and kind of, depending on how they may fit with different programs, but I think a nice way to kind of highlight different positive ways that youth sports are being done throughout the country. So I wanted to highlight a little bit moving forward. If you've looked at the National Youth Sports Strategy, Chapter 8 is really our roadmap within the Department of Health and Human Services of how we are going to work towards the implementation piece. So we spent this year developing the youth sports strategy and really felt like that was kind of the first step into the federal government playing a larger role and encouraging more kids to play youth sports. The way we have youth sports set up in the United States is very different than other countries, and so it was important to kind of think and take a step back and figure out where is our role in all of this and what's the piece that we can play. So there's 4 pillars that we will be spending the next few years focusing on from the implementation side. So that's things like communication and promotion. So we have the Move Your Way communications campaign, which we launched with the physical activity guidelines for Americans. And we are creating additional resources. We have some for adults and kids generally that talk about physical activity, but we are doing research now to develop sport-specific ones for parents, for coaches, for kids themselves. We are working with CDC in terms of the measurement side of it and the surveillance. CDC does a lot of that work already, and there are some challenges with how we collect that information and how we're able to compare. So we're trying to see what we might be able to do around surveillance. We're doing a lot around partnership and stakeholder engagement, so meeting with various organizations and trying to learn about how we as the government can support what is already being done. We were able to give out, on the day we launched this in September, the Office of Women's Health and the Office of Minority Health gave out over $6.5 million in grants to 18 different communities. So we are working with those groups to be able to target underserved populations, develop sports programming, and kind of learn from those groups of what's working kind of at the ground level. And then finally, also coordinating things across the federal government, so that's across HHS, Department of Ed, and other offices, so we can make sure that we are collectively helping to move things forward from the youth sports perspective. I'll leave you with this list here of available resources. So like every government document and work that we do, everything is available online. It's free to download, to use, to share. We do have a partner promotion toolkit with sample tweets, sample images, things you can put up on Facebook and Twitter and other social media. If you want the Cliff Notes versions of things, the top few on here, the top 10 things to know, executive summary, and frequently asked questions. We'll give you a shorter version than the 100-plus page strategy itself, but it's all here. The website's at the bottom, health.gov/PA guidelines/youth sports strategy. And I will wrap up, just kind of remind you of our vision and invite you all to be a part of this with us. Again, I appreciate being a part of this conversation today, and I'm sorry I can't be there in the room, but I hope as you all are moving forward and thinking, what's the role from the coach piece of this? How does this fit into the larger vision that we're working on? That one day all youth will have the opportunity, motivation, and access to play sports, regardless of race, ethnicity, sex, ability, or zip code. And I'll leave my contact information is there at the bottom if there are questions or things now or in the future. And again, really appreciate being a part of this conversation and look forward to hearing about all the work that you all are doing.